Okay, well, welcome, and thank you for coming. I know it's always tough to be towards the end of the conference. We're not the last one, though. There is another session after this one, but it's always a hard one. Given the background of the presentation, I thought it would be good to give you a little bit about the motivation behind this talk and a little bit of our backgrounds as well, so you know where we're coming from with some of the comments and the topics we're going to touch based on. So the inspiration for the talk came actually in another Hadoop summit that we presented, and we were, after the conference, relaxing and talking how Hadoop has not only really changed technology, it has really touched our everyday lives. And the reason is it really has changed the way that we do business, the way that we sell, we market, the way we do software development, and especially in large corporations. And honestly, the way you market as a software developer as well. It's a very different world, and it really went really, really fast. So my name is Adriana, and I'm a program director in the IBM Analytics division. Until very recently, I was a development lead for BigSQL, which is our SQL on Hadoop solution. And I spent 3 years in that team. And prior to that, I spent 15 years in the database world. I was a runtime developer. I worked with joint technologies in particular, and I work in the performance team. So I had a lot of focus on performance. I did a lot of benchmarking. And you want to introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi. Sounds like it's working. Yeah. Hi, I'm Scott Gray. I'm the senior architect for IBM Open Platform for Apache Hadoop, which, for those of you who don't know, we have a Hadoop distribution. I'm sure it's well known throughout the world, but I just thought I would mention that we do have a Hadoop distribution. Prior to that, I was a lead architect for IBM BigSQL, so that's how Adriana and I got to know each other. I'm currently on the technical steering committee and the release team committee for ODPI, which is an organization trying to lay down some standards around Hadoop distributions to make it easier to port applications between distributions. I'm also an open source developer. I have a tool that I authored called JSquish, kind of a database tool, and for the 3 of you that use the feature, I implemented the VI compatibility mode for JLine 2, which is a line editing tool. So everybody who knows about that feature, just me.
So let me give you a rundown of the agenda. We're going to divide the talk in 2 parts. I'm going to start by talking about the business impact of open source. So I'll go through how we used to do business before, what the world looked like. Then we're going to talk about how the world changed, our view on why the world has changed. Then how that influenced customers, the customers' perspectives on software, and how their requirements and the conversation between vendors and customers changed dramatically. And then how that impact within our own corporations, and customers are now, they want something different. So how we're going to address that, and we need to adapt, we need to evolve. And then Scott is going to go into.
So I'm going to cover so that's the side of the business. What was the impact of open source and of Hadoop on the business? But it had a radical influence on us on the development side of things. It took us from, even though we had already kind of been in the process of trying to go agile, it forced us to completely change our development model from being completely isolationist to interacting with this new and foreign community. I'll talk about the process of kind of getting integrated with the community, getting familiar with the processes, and then how that process led us into having to adapt to a more agile strategy. And then finally, we'll just wrap up with what's next. Where is this world of Hadoop and this world of open source taking industries and large corporations like ourselves?
Okay. So once upon a time, how was the world before? So before this whole revolution, there was the large corporations. We have proprietary software. So we own the software end to end, the whole thing, have complete control on the software. Our releases were sometimes years apart. It was not uncommon to wait like 2-3 years maybe to have a major release. And we had a lot of time to look at customers' requirements, to actually design the features, code them, test them. There was a focus on high quality. There was a very clear path for our sales force and for everybody to know when things were coming, to tell the customers about it. Lots of focus on patents and protection from the competition, right? Nobody wanted to tell what was coming. As a matter of fact, we never, in IBM as a corporate, we would never announce anything except in the quarter that we're actually going to sell it. So there was no headlights of what was coming. There were, and I'll touch base more on that after. Competition was well defined. If you were in a product, for example, like I was in DB2, we knew who our competitors were. And it wasn't very common that new competitors will appear out of nowhere. I mean, there were a few established competitors when you went to talk to a customer. And customers have large IT budgets. The discussions were about multi-year contracts, large profit margins. Customers would take a long time to evaluate and make a decision because they understood they were making long-term commitments with their vendors. But the world was changing, and it was almost as a perfect storm on why Hadoop was successful. It was not only about the technology. It was the data was exploding. There was a lot of data. There was, as well, social media coming along, an appetite from customers to really extract value from unstructured data as well. But storage was expensive. Most people were getting all the relevant data, filtering, and trying to fit it inside a warehouse and try to ask the questions there. Budget restrictions, especially after 2008, made all these budgets really come down. And IT companies, they still had IT departments, they still have the requirements, but they didn't have the budget anymore. And open source has been getting popularity in the enterprise world as mainstream, slowly, obviously, since I think the catalyst was when Linux came on board, it started to be common to see it in enterprises. And I think another important one, and it was also an eye-opener for me when I was preparing the presentation and thinking about, and we were discussing how the stage was being set for Hadoop, is there was no commercial competition for Hadoop. It's not that there was another product at the time that could do what Hadoop was able to do. And it came out as open source. It came out as free. It was able to address the issues of the large data sets, cheap commodity hardware, easy to scale, resilient. Obviously, the enterprise world took notice. And they started rethinking, wow, we have Hadoop. So what else can we have? What is going on? So customers started thinking, well, moving to open source is a good idea. And I started having conversations with customers at the time. At the beginning, customers were not really sure where they were standing. They knew something was going on, but they were not 100% where to go. And one thing that was clear is the main reason why customers were considering open source is because they absolutely hate vendor lock-in. And I really understand it, especially as I told you, I was in DB2. And when customers have to make a decision on a database, they'll buy the database, we install everything, and at the time of the renewal, of course, we knew as vendors the migration is extremely painful, it's hard to get out of there. Customers didn't have much leverage to negotiate those contracts, and they absolutely despise it. Some customers had some strategies for that, so they would have sometimes multiple vendors. So they would say, well, if I cannot deal with you, I have Oracle here or Teradata, and they would try to leverage us. But the reality is a migration was extremely painful, and that was something that companies do not want. Software was inexpensive. It's inexpensive if you're using open source. It's not free, because companies in general are very unwilling to run production in unsupported software. They want someone they can go to when they have issues, to fix their problems, to get their support. Of course, distributions offer a lot of advantages towards you downloading your own components and creating your own environments. And also, there are deployment costs. Sometimes open source, depending on the stage of the components, is not as polished as you would have something that is being done already with a particular marketing in mind. So there was sometimes the deployment costs were a little bit higher than on traditional software. But still, at the end of the day, it's an inexpensive approach. And the other one that is very interesting, and Scott will touch base more on that, is customers are used now to this new pace where there are new things coming all the time, and they always want it. They want the new feature. They want the business possibility this new feature will get them, and they want it now. On the other hand, there is a very large number of customers that they want that on the one side, but they want very stable software. They don't want to change that fast, maybe their productions environments, because it will cause disruption. Or if they have applications built on top, sometimes they also have to make modifications there. So it is painful to change. So how do you balance the two? And I was very happy to see the announcement from Hortonworks 2.4, where they addressed this issue, because we haven't discussed this for years. I'm telling you, it was a conversation over beer like many times on how often do we release. It was also a conversation in the office, but the bitching happened with the beer. Let me get the water. So customers change, and the customer is always right. So corporations started getting into those boardrooms and say, what do we do now? Do we embrace? Do we support it? Do we ignore it? I think many companies that maybe have a niche market could afford to ignore it. I think the vast majority cannot. And although maybe IBM has been late in many things, we were not late on this one, in the sense that we have been involved with open source for a long time. And I don't know how many of you might remember, back in 2001, IBM put forward a statement that they will invest $1 billion, when $1 billion was a lot more than now, to support Linux. And we did a lot around that. And that one and HTTP server were, I think, the early projects that really pushed the enterprises to start adopting open source in mainstream enterprises. And with IBM supporting it, it started to be not only advisable, but it was advisable even sometimes to have this. So we were not new, but Hadoop was different. Why wasn't different? Because Linux was about one thing. It was about the operating system. Hadoop is changing everything, because it's changing the platform and everything that is happening on top, the applications. You saw here in the conference how Hortonworks is making a lot of, stressing a lot about the applications. Now it's not about the platform anymore, it's about the things you're building on top. So it's affecting everything we do. All our products, every product, we have this, do we need to support Hadoop? How we support Hadoop? Everybody had to change their strategies. But capitalism is here to stay, at least I hope that doesn't crumble. And that means companies need to make money. So the first question that we needed to answer is, how do we make money out of this? What's the business model? And there were two approaches that emerged as a result. We have the purely open source place, like Red Hat, Hortonworks, and the value-add place, which most of the vendors, the large vendors, adopted, which is we support open source, we leverage open source, but we will have, or will try to have, like things that are valuable, they're still proprietary, that we are going to sell on top of that. And software as a service companies are deploying this strategy. So, one question that we asked at the beginning when we first started in all this, and we continue to ask, is what would large enterprises open source? Why would we open source, right? Well, I think that there are many reasons. One, for example, are products that we found that are not significantly more advanced than what you have in open source today. So if you have a product that doesn't add a lot of value add, it's not something you're going to be able to go and sell a customer for a profit. Because customers say, yeah, no, well, I'll do open source, and in a year or so, I'll get the same features. So that is something that usually it's a win-win, because the open source community, gets that extra features that they didn't have, and is really not something that a corporation might want to keep as closed source. And products where the community is very active and they're going to catch up soon, no matter how large the corporation. The power of the community is huge, and when the community puts their head towards something, the number of developers that work on something, no matter how many employees you have, it's extremely hard to compete with. So that's another area where that you might want to open source your products. Non-profitable, this sounds like a dummy one, but it's not, because we have products, for example, in IBM, that we have a lot of customers that they love them. But we don't have new customers, and it's not growing. So does it make sense for us to continue in that business? Maybe not. But you don't want to throw it away because you know that there's people that can benefit for it. So maybe some of those non-profitable products are products that you can put out there in the open source community. One of the main ones ongoing is always about the infrastructure we might need for our own value adds. There might be features we want to add to some of the platform that we have things built on top of that are maybe benefit us from, I don't know, extending some feature we have or adding a new capability. So that's another area where it makes sense for enterprises to contribute into open source. Besides bugs and all that, right? That's a given. And there is some to improve customer and community perception. There is some of that as well. Now, with all of this, there still might be reasons on why companies might not want to open source. And I think the main one is giving up control. Everybody likes control. If you have a product, you want exactly the product to go that way with that roadmap. You want to do things this way. And if you open source, the product takes a life on its own. The community starts guiding. They might want to add features, do things differently. So sometimes it's something you might not want to do in certain products. Too complex and large. Imagine, for example, something like DB2 I work on. I work on DB2 on Linux, Windows, and on Unix and Windows, not on mainframe. 30 million lines of code. If you open source it, is it really the community going to adopt it? It's like, are we doing that because it's a label to say we're open source? It really doesn't make any sense to open source something like that, or at least, I don't know. Right now, it seems to me it doesn't. And again, as we put in the disclaimer at the beginning, this is our views of things, not those of IBM. But I think it's something that the community would not adopt. It's expensive. Putting things in open source is not saying, oh, I'm putting it there, it's a gift, it's free. You have to invest in being the custodian for the software after you open source it, and something you do not make money off. You need to prepare the code for open source. Sometimes you might take some of the proprietary IP from it. You need to go through code clearance. You need to sometimes write more documents. So it's not cheap, it's not free. And there's corporate politics. There are projects in the open source world that are really being backed by certain corporations, and they might not want other corporations to play nice. And they're, politics. Nobody's going to say it openly, but it's true. Sometimes it's tough to try to help in some projects. So product management actually deal with most of these, we're drawing the lines, what offerings we have, and they have to adapt to this new world. But marketing and sales also have to adapt. And one of the things that I touched base earlier in is the number of players in some spaces. It's unprecedented. When we presented Big SQL, the challenge of Big SQL on Hadoop back in 2014 in the Hadoop Summit, we walked through the expo and there were like 22 companies claiming that they have best SQL on Hadoop engine. So the barrier of entry is low, and the reason for that is because now small and open is seen as attractive. In the past, if you were a big corporation, it was solid. Banks, financials, everybody will see. But now companies are willing to see like those small companies popping if they have a really good offering. So everybody sits at the table. And that's hard for sales because you have to change the way you do things, the way you approach things. And sometimes being big, it's playing against us. Because now small is agile and nice, big is slow, and it's a perception that we need to fight. The new rules of roadmaps. This is another one over beer many times. So in the corporate world, you really do not get your roadmaps known in advance. You do it within the quarter you're going to sell. You have specific cases, special cases where you have a few very customers that you invite to the labs to give them, a peek on the roadmap. But then usually you only sell what you have. The open source world is open, so everybody knows what you have, but also the roadmaps are available. And many customers make decisions on what they're going to purchase or what they're going to do based on those roadmaps. Now, the timing of the roadmap could change because the community may not, it's not committing to time sometimes. But in the corporate world, if we put a roadmap and we share the roadmap, and we don't deliver when we say we're going to deliver, we're dead. So it's extremely hard to commit to roadmaps because especially things change. So one way you might be doing all this and then something comes and this disrupts the way your product is going and you need to adapt to go that way, but the customer saw you were going this way and they want the features there. You don't want to invest it in lots of discussions around that. But you need to actually make those roadmaps open because if not, you cannot really compete. It's almost as competing with a product and all the future releases of that product at a point in time. Traditional benchmarking. This was a painful lesson. So coming from the DB2 world, when I took over with SQL, and everybody's saying, what are the fastest SQL in Hadoop? I said, okay, nope. How are these people making these claims? In the database world, you have an auditor, you have benchmarks that are well-defined. So it is the way that we were competing in the database world. And we did a benchmark against Impala and against Hive, and it was audited, and we showed how we were much faster. The moment we published, I think it was a few weeks later, the new version of Hive came out. Impala got another release. It went out of date like that. The amount of effort we put in the benchmark, it was huge. It was a great accomplishment, but it didn't help sales, or marketing, which is the tool that's benchmarking is one of the tools we used to do in the past for that. Because customers say, well, that's all news. How do you perform against the new release? So traditional benchmark didn't work. And the main one, I think, for us is about keeping customer trust, and it's hard. Because in the past, you go and you have a product, you're passionate about the product you have, it's the best. You look at the use case, it makes sense, you sell the product. But now it's open source. And if there is an open source alternative that even is maybe not as fast or not as reliable, not as bells and whistles that we have, but it's good enough for the customer, we should not be selling. So sellers needed to learn not to sell. And that was a tough one. And sometimes the toughest part is sometimes it's not clear. Sometimes it's not clear if open source is good enough for them or not, or is that use case they will benefit because in the future they're going to grow that way. And sometimes it's hard to make the call, and you don't want to lose the customer trust because we build on customer relationships. It's not about making software and putting it out and selling it and forgetting about it. So that was a hard one, and there's still many more things that, especially around marketing, and that we can get into. But I think these are the main ones that we wanted to address. But anyway, this was about the business, product management, marketing, sales. But the software engineering teams had a huge impact. And I'm going to pass it on to Scott to go over that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the software engineering side of things. I'll caveat this with, as Adriana said, IBM's been in the open source world for a very long time. So you'd see, well, how did you have to evolve? You've been doing it already. But the reality is, yes, there was that part of the business on the Linux side. We've done huge contributions to Linux. Eclipse came out of IBM. Derby came out of IBM. We're in the process of open sourcing the IBM JDK. So there's, we've done huge contributions. So I'm looking at this purely from the Hadoop stack side, or basically from my experience side of things. So I started at IBM. It'll be 5 years, 5 years ago in September. And right as I was joining, they were releasing their first version of Hadoop, and they said, hey, you want to come work for us and work on Hadoop? I said, work on what? I had no clue what it was. I relational database background. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But so I walked in the door and got involved with Hadoop and watched the process of building the software. And so I got to see kind of from the very, very beginning, and also having come from closed source development companies prior to that, I got to see this impact of watching this giant corporation have to suddenly shift directions and learn to play with the community. So, I think this would be obvious to anybody who's worked in anywhere other than just pure open source. How did things used to work? Things used to work, gather requirements from the customer, prioritize those requirements, maybe sit down and put a project plan together, publish a roadmap, tell your customers where you're going, make sure you keep them engaged, because you tell them little slideware, and eventually they so they stick with you down that roadmap. But as Adriana said, we had to stick with the roadmap and promise what we promised, or deliver what we promised. Develop the documentation, QA, release, rake in a whole bunch of money, and start over again. So that was the traditional way of doing software. And the nice thing about this was we had all the control in the world. We had all the control over what features were going to go in the product, when those features would be made available, the quality, or not just quality, but the design, the design and implementation and architecture, and how that fit into maybe a longer term strategy behind the software. We for better or for worse, we ensured the quality of the software and then tested to try to make sure it all worked. Did compatibility testing, which is important, and I'll get to this later, but to make sure that every release was fully backwards compatible with the previous one, or at least we could tell customers, here's what to expect. And also, we knew we could support them. We wrote every line of code. We had people who, in every single area of the product, that knew the code and could support the customer. And all the way down to, if we really, depending on the project manager, all the way down to the coding style, the documentation in the code, and so on. So the end result of this was, I guess the negative side of this is, compared to what's going on today in the open source world, and particularly in the world of Hadoop, is that it's slow and methodical. We're trying to stay pace with the rate of change today in that traditional model is almost impossible. However, on the other hand, and this is something we're beginning to see more and more, and Adriana talked about, is that enterprise customers like this. They tend to like long-term stability, long-term commitment to support and to making sure things don't change and they don't have to overhaul their environment constantly. And also for a company particularly like IBM, where we don't just provide a Hadoop platform, but we have a dozen products that sit on top of it. And there's many more out there of partners and other vendors that sit on top of our product. And so to have, so in the traditional model, we'd have a release every year or two. And so there's a long stabilization period, or a long stable period for those products to run. And now in this fast-paced world where people want releases, particularly Hadoop releases out all the time with bleeding edge features all the time, we're having internal struggles on, what do we do here? Actually, the thing I always find is everybody wants every feature on the planet right now until they go into production. Then they stop changing. And anyway, that's another presentation. But ultimately, what this means is that we can give very strong assurances to our customers about what's coming, what we delivered, and quality, stability, and support. We had complete responsibility for better or for worse, and but the main thing was just freedom and autonomy. So, as I said, I entered IBM right as they were preparing their first release. And so I was watching the paradigm shift go on. And this, I think, was the hardest one, letting go. That adopting adopting and being involved with free software means you've got to relinquish this control, or not relinquish, but you just don't have that level that you had anymore, or that you used to have anymore. The community controls all the things that we care about, and the features, the functionality, the timeline, the roadmap, quality, stability, performance, compatibility, even all the way down to the documentation. And to be blunt, looking across particularly the Hadoop stack, each and every component involved in the Hadoop distribution has various levels of quality here. Kafka has amazing documentation, has really, really good documentation. Hive has very good documentation. Other components, it's tough. And so we don't have control over it, and that's hard. And I know I can hear everyone beginning to inhale to say, but dummy, it's open source. Get involved, fix it, become part of the community. You are the community, not us. We are all the community. And you're right. You're absolutely right. That's what open source is all about. But first, we had to learn, how do you become part of that community? And So, at the beginning, way back when at the beginning, we had some developers that had been involved in the Apache Software Foundation projects. They were familiar with the process. But quite frankly, the overwhelming majority, when they decided to build our distribution, the overwhelming majority of the developers that were brought in came from traditional software world. We had a bunch of DB2 developers, Informix developers, people from all over the place, Cognos, everybody. And most of these people they felt the process was really burdensome, unfamiliar, slow, uncomfortable. And so they had to learn to work with the community. And, at the beginning, I would see things like developers finding a bug, and they would file a JIRA. And then they would, man, I wish somebody would fix this. This is a real problem. And so, they felt that this wasn't my area of expertise. I don't know the code. It's a complex problem. And so they would sit. And then the people that were familiar with the community would kind of take them by the shoulder and say, no, that's not how to do it. And and then we would evolve the process of how to do it. And we had to learn how to get attention from the community. So even if maybe you filed the JIRA, you found the bug, you provided the patch, sometimes you still wait, and the patch sits there, and it sits there. And how do you get attention? You had to learn to accept input and criticism. That happens in a normal company, a closed source company, but when somebody's telling you it's a face, you can respond to it and see the reaction. When it's an email, it hurts. We had a lot of hurt feelings. Building committers, I'll talk about this in a minute. Building committers was a big process, and designing out in the open. We had to learn to stop trying. We would originally go design something, get it 3/4 of the way built, and say, "Here, community," and the community would go, "But that wasn't what we wanted." So we had to learn to start at the beginning. And basically, the big part was we had to learn to be patient. We couldn't run at the pace and do things the way that we used to. And we had to learn that the community has challenges. Like any community out there, your local neighborhood, sometimes people don't get along. Sometimes the community is small and inclusive. Certain software, certain components out there maintain a lot of control, and they're reluctant to let code in. And so it's a very, very slow and methodical process. Sometimes they're doing it for the right reasons. Sometimes they care a lot about quality and they want only the best people involved. Sometimes I think they're just control nuts. And frankly, even when you become a committer, doesn't mean you can just commit. If you're a Hive committer and you did most of your work on the parser and you go to fix something in the query optimizer, if you just go throw the code in, people are going to get angry. That's not your area of expertise. Somebody else had a vision. You have to work with them. So we had to learn a lot about the community, both from the process side and the politics side. And by the way, closed source has this problem too. You're a group of developers, people are making changes, people disagree. One person wants this design, another person wants that design. But at least, you could sit in a conference room and talk it out. Or maybe you had a manager out there or a technical leader that could draw a line in the sand and say, no, we're doing it this way. Or if push comes to shove, you grab your coworker, drag them out back, and beat the snot out of them. And then, so that's the kind of process part of it. But, what did it do to our that was sort of the community development side of it, but what did it do to our process? So, from the process perspective, as I said, when I walked in the door, just as the first version of our Hadoop distribution was going out, they were trying to build a distribution, trying to work with a bunch of open source components in a traditional software development process, in a waterfall model. We're going to have all these features, it's going to install this way and function this way, and they're all going to work this way, and we're going to work until they're done. And then we had to go through all that process. And what happened was we waited and waited and waited, and it took a really, really, really long time to get out the door. We were doing it wrong. So it really forced us, even though we thought we were doing Agile internally, we weren't kind of doing Agile in the fashion that you have to do for the community. The community sort of forces you down the fact because we can't plan when a feature is going to be added to a component. We can't, while we can figure out how long it'll take us to build the feature, we still have to go through the process of acceptance. We could know, we've said this many, many times, but I say this many, many times because it makes a lot of people in IBM angry. that we can no longer publish a detailed roadmap. Customers ask us all the time, what's your roadmap? What's going to be in the next release? Well, the problem is we can't promise, we can't promise 6 months down the road we'll have Hadoop 3.0 in. We don't know when Hadoop 3.0 is going to be released. We don't know the quality of it. We'll be testing it now, but when it's finally done, it'll take time. Anyway, so we can't tell them when that'll be available. But on the other hand, it really changed our process for the better. It got us more comfortable. It allowed us to be more, oddly enough, agile allowed us to be more agile. It allowed us to change on a dime, change our approach, change our direction, and keep moving. And I guess the last aspect of this that I'll talk about is, again, actually I'd submitted an abstract that didn't get accepted, but I wanted to talk about behind the scenes of a Hadoop distribution. Like, what's it really like? How awful it is to build a Hadoop distribution. It's a fascinating topic, but it's fascinating because you're bringing about all this software, all moving at their own pace, all developed by different developers, all adding different features in different places, and with different ideas in mind of the direction of the software, with different levels of quality and maturity. Some components have really nice management interfaces and usability features. Others have obscure configuration files. Some of these components will have features, preview features, like, hey, go out there and kick the tires. Well, we're selling it to enterprises, and we can't stop them from kicking those tires. And then when something breaks, they call us up and says, hey, your stuff doesn't work. That's hard to hear. But we have to take it because we're selling the stuff. But so, and when you start to get up to out of this kind of monovision of working on one component and looking at bringing them all together, the problems are magnified hugely, and especially when you go to integrate them. On this release, this won't talk to this, but it'll talk to that. Anyway, there's a million interesting issues. I'll do in another presentation sometime. But this last one is difficult too, is backwards compatibility. In the traditional world, we could have an assurance, some kind of assurance to a customer that if your application runs today and you upgrade the software, it'll keep running. In the distribution world, in the Hadoop world, it's almost impossible because there's changes going in that are out of our control. So anyway, as Adriana pointed out, I think Hortonworks is changing their model. I'm hoping very soon we'll change our model to offer. It'll be slower change, but longer periods of stability. But this sounds all very negative. It's fun. It's fun to be involved in the community. It's been an eye-opener, both positive and negative, but mostly positive, in watching what a group of people can do together. And to watch that, even though what's weird is it's individually it's really painful, but you put it all together and we produce something really pretty amazing. So where do we go from here? What's next? So it's certainly Hadoop and open source has forced IBM, or at least my part of IBM, to evolve rapidly. But it's pushing the whole industry. The open source is moving so fast, Hadoop is moving so fast that we have to innovate. We have to do something really, really different. I think our latest really, really different is all the things you've seen coming out of Watson, which are just utterly fascinating. It's pushing new areas of research. It's defining new markets. We have to help define new markets and help drive both closed source and open source and push technological advances. And basically, this rate of innovation, this rate of improvement doesn't show any sign of slowing down. And so we all have to figure out how to keep pace and do it in a way that we can make money. And that's it.
You should mention that one is a new neural computer.
Oh, is that? I asked you what all the pictures meant, and you said, "Oh, they're Watson." Okay, this is that new neural computer you may have heard about. I guess we're almost out of time, but any questions? Yeah.
Hello, please. What's your thought process when coming with your own Hadoop distribution?
Do you mean what's our thought process for?
Let's make it easy. Why, actually?
Why does IBM have their own Hadoop distribution? I think control. So part of it, I think part of it is that we do have a lot of products that integrate and sit on top of Hadoop. And in the past, the distributions varied so wildly. And, but that's also one of the reasons we helped to get involved in ODPI, was to try to level the playing field and make it where products can be portable. So maybe over time, I don't know, maybe there'll be less of an argument, but it also kind of gives us a place to innovate as well. But it's a good question.
And also sometimes it's easier to sell a blue stack. When you go to a customer, they want the whole thing. They don't want to deal with more than one vendor. That's another good reason for it.
Yeah. It's another question?
I have a question about the committers for the Hadoop. Initially, all of you guys start as a side project, right? And the majority of the committers now have been hired by Hortonworks, Cloudera, Mapar. So is this changing a lot to the vision of where Hadoop is going, or there is still a high freedom in what are the choice?
Yeah, I guess I'll repeat the questions. I guess we're being recorded. So the question was about. So when we started, we didn't have a lot of committers, and many of the committers have been snapped up by most have started from Yahoo, but Hortonworks and Cloudera, and actually, that part has been painful too. We've had to grow ours naturally, and it's not entirely true. We've hired some. But we've grown quite a few, and actually we're really proud. Especially right now, we're doing a huge push to work with Hortonworks on Ambari, and I think we've made some great inroads in helping improve Ambari and grow our own committers in that area as well.
But we're hiring.
Yeah,
Tom.
yeah. Any committers? Yeah, come talk to us.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're out of time, but I don't know. If there's any more questions, I guess come on up and talk to us.
We can stay outside and answer. Thank you.